Know your place and walk away. Alexander Ward didn't even look at her. His voice sliced through the silence like glass. The billionaire reclined in his leather chair, eyes closed, pretending to rest. One hand resting casually on a stack of confidential files that could ruin a dozen lives. In reality, this was no nap. It was a test, a trap. He had locked the room, turned on the hidden cameras, and was waiting for Elena Brooks to make her move. One wrong touch, one glance at the files, and she would be out of his life before morning. To him, she was nothing more than a pretty face he could parade at charity galas, someone easy to replace when the game got boring. But Elena didn't touch anything. She just stood there, watching him with eyes too calm for someone being tested. Then, slowly, she pulled out her phone, typed a short string of numbers, and whispered, "Congratulations." Alexander's eyelids twitched. Something about her tone sent a shiver down his spine. Elena slipped the phone back into her pocket and smiled softly. "You're about to look great on tomorrow's front page." The air froze. The billionaire who thought he was testing her didn't realize she had already finished testing him. Every secret he'd buried, every number he'd hidden offshore, was already gone, sent to the people who would make sure the world saw who Alexander Ward truly was. He had just been outplayed by the woman he thought was beneath him. The silence in the office stretched thin after Elena's last words. Alexander didn't move, but behind those closed eyes, his mind raced. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure he was in control. When he finally opened his eyes, she was standing by the window, the soft glow of the city brushing her face. No diamonds, no designer labels, just a white blouse tucked neatly into a pair of faded jeans. Her hair was pulled low in a simple knot, and there wasn't a trace of makeup on her skin. She looked like someone who didn't need to prove a thing. Graham Holt leaned closer to Alexander, lowering his voice. "She's too clean," he muttered. "Nobody's that perfect. Everyone hides something." Alexander didn't answer. He just studied her reflection in the glass. Every movement was controlled, deliberate, graceful in a way that made him uneasy. He was used to women who tried to impress him, who fidgeted under pressure. Elena didn't fidget. She observed. Her eyes scanned the room, once subtle, sharp, calculating. They flicked briefly to a framed photo of Alexander and his late father on the shelf. To anyone else, it looked like an innocent glance, but her fingers brushed the frame just slightly, sliding a coaster beneath it. The gesture seemed casual, meaningless. Graham frowned, not realizing what had just happened. The small disc she had used now blocked the tiny pinhole camera hidden behind the frame. Alexander's empire was built on control, on seeing everything before it happened. Yet here was a woman dismantling that control without breaking a sweat. She turned back toward him and smiled politely. "Do you ever get tired of pretending to sleep?" she asked softly. For a split second, he forgot how to breathe. Elena reached for the pen on his desk and twirled it lightly between her fingers, her movements calm, confident. "You like to test people, don't you?" she said, setting the pen back down with a soft click. "But what happens when someone passes your test?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Nobody ever does." "Then maybe you've been giving the wrong tests." There was something dangerous in the way she said it, quiet, certain, like she already knew how the story would end. Outside the office, faint sounds of the engagement party drifted up through the marble halls. Laughter, clinking glasses, a string quartet playing something elegant. Downstairs, the world still believed in Alexander Ward, the charming billionaire with a perfect fiancée. But up here, in the stillness of that office, a new game had already begun. And for the first time, Alexander wasn't the one writing the rules. The sound of the ocean drifted through the open balcony doors, mixing with the hum of soft jazz and the clinking of crystal. The Ward estate glowed like a dream, every chandelier blazing, every guest shimmering in designer perfection. It was the kind of night that reeked of old money and polished lies. Elena Brooks entered quietly. No spotlight followed her, no crowd turned in admiration. She wore a simple white dress, soft fabric that caught the golden light and nothing more. No diamonds, no perfume, just calm. But calm looked out of place in a room full of people addicted to noise. Madeline Ward, Alexander's cousin, spotted her first, dressed in crimson silk with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. She raised her voice just enough for everyone to hear. "Well, if it isn't the blushing bride, tell me, Elena, did you borrow that dress from the maid?" Laughter rippled through the room like champagne overflowing from crystal flutes. A few guests turned away, hiding their smirks behind glasses of wine. Someone whispered, "She used to be an accountant, right? Poor thing probably still uses coupons." Elena did not blush. She did not flinch. She lifted a glass of water from a passing tray, her hand steady as marble, and took a slow sip. Then she turned to Madeline, her voice soft, but slicing clean through the laughter. "Numbers tell stories," she said. "What's yours?" The laughter stopped. The silence that followed was louder than the music. Madeline's smile faltered, and her jeweled fingers twitched around her glass. Alexander stood across the room, watching, his expression unreadable. He had thrown this party to test her again, to see how she handled pressure, yet somehow she looked more in control than he did. A waiter passed by, nearly tripping in his haste to avoid her gaze. The scent of gardenias filled the air, thick and sweet. Somewhere, the pianist missed a note. A young journalist in a wrinkled blazer pushed forward through the crowd, holding up his phone to record. "Miss Brooks," he asked quickly, "is it true that War Global is under financial investigation? People are saying the empire's cracking." Every head turned, cameras lifted. The air throbbed with curiosity and hunger. Elena tilted her head, her lips curving into a faint smile. "You should ask Alexander," she said softly. "He loves questions." A low murmur swept the hall as the journalist spun toward Alexander, who froze for a fraction of a second before regaining his polished composure. Elena placed her glass down, perfectly centered on the white linen tablecloth, and glanced at the mirrored ceiling. In the reflection, she saw it all. The stares, the whispers, the fragile egos hiding behind tuxedos and diamonds. No one knew it yet. But this was the last night Alexander Ward's empire would ever shine this bright. The laughter from the party dimmed as Graham Holt slipped through the crowd, his face pale beneath the glow of the chandeliers. He reached Alexander's side, leaning in with urgency masked behind a stiff smile. "Alexander," he whispered, "we have a problem. Someone just accessed the company's servers. The breach came from Europe. It's bad. Really bad." Alexander's confident grin froze. "Handle it," he muttered through his teeth. Graham's voice tightened. "We can't. Whoever it is has admin-level clearance. It looks internal." For the first time that evening, Alexander's carefully crafted charm began to crack. His eyes swept the room until they landed on Elena. She stood across the hall, serene as ever, a faint smile touching her lips as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. The music faltered when he strode toward her. The crowd sensed tension before they understood why. Glasses stopped midair. Conversations trailed off. When Alexander reached her, he grabbed her hand with a forceful grip that made heads turn. "Care to explain why my servers just went offline?" he said through a clenched jaw. His voice wrapped in honey but lined with steel. Elena's calm didn't waver. "You should talk to your IT department," she said lightly, pulling her hand back. "They seem underqualified." He leaned closer. "Don't play games with me. Elena, you forget who I am?" She met his gaze, her tone even. "No, Alexander? I think you're the one who forgot." The pianist stopped playing entirely. A thick hush rolled through the ballroom. Every eye was now on them. Alexander forced a tight smile, masking the fury building behind his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, "why don't we bring the lovely bride-to-be up here for a few words?" The crowd clapped uncertainly as he guided her toward the small stage, his grip still firm. Under the golden lights, they looked like a perfect couple again, but the air around them was electric, trembling with something unspoken. He leaned close enough for only her to hear. "Whatever you think you're doing, stop it now, or you'll regret it." Elena reached into her clutch and pulled out a small ivory envelope, sealed in red wax. She held it between her fingers, her movements slow and deliberate. "Consider this my engagement gift," she said softly. Alexander frowned, taking the envelope. "What is this?" "Read it if you want to know where you'll be tomorrow." The weight of her voice silenced the room. He broke the seal and unfolded the document. The bold heading caught his eye instantly. United States Securities and Exchange Commission. Below it, a list of allegations, references, and case numbers. His blood ran cold. Elena's eyes never left him. "You said no one could touch you," she murmured. "I just did." Gasps spread across the crowd like wildfire. A reporter lifted his phone. "Recording?" Graham stood frozen by the bar, color draining from his face. Alexander's hand tightened around the letter until the paper crumpled, his knuckles whitening under the pressure. He forced a smile, one of those smooth, practiced gestures that had once charmed investors and silenced enemies. But tonight, it fooled no one. "This is ridiculous, he said, his voice rising with false confidence. "She's joking." The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers rippling across the grand hall like wind through glass. Elena didn't flinch. Her voice, calm and razor-sharp, sliced through the noise. "Then you won't mind," she said evenly, "if they play your little offshore recordings upstairs." A beat of silence followed a heartbeat. A breath, and then the chandeliers flickered. The lights dimmed as a soft mechanical hum filled the air. From somewhere above, the old ballroom projector came to life, casting its beam across the golden walls. Alexander turned, his smile faltering. On the massive screen behind the stage, images began to appear, numbers, bank statements, and faces he recognized all too well. The room gasped as his carefully hidden empire unfolded before their eyes. Frame by frame, he stood frozen, the illusion of control shattering with every passing second. The game he had spent years mastering, the one he believed he could never lose, was no longer his to play. And as the truth flickered across the screen for all to see, Alexander Ward understood his empire wasn't being challenged. It was being dismantled. The ballroom fell into absolute silence. The LED screen behind the stage flickered once, then came alive with a cold blue light. At first, the crowd thought it was part of the evening's entertainment, maybe a slideshow or a romantic montage. But then they heard his voice. Alexander Ward's unmistakable tone filled the room. "Move the money through the Zurich account first, then transfer the rest through the Cayman shell. No one tracks it if you bury it deep enough." The sound hit like a gunshot. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, when everything stopped. The video showed Alexander's reflection in his laptop, face lit by the glow of the screen, his voice calm, confident, and utterly damning. A woman in a sequin gown gasped, dropping her champagne flute. The shattering glass seemed to echo through the stunned crowd. Graham Holt went pale, eyes darting wildly between the screen and Alexander. He took an involuntary step back. On stage, Alexander's jaw locked tight. "This is fake," he hissed, voice trembling with rage. "Turn it off." But before anyone could move, Elena stepped forward, calm, composed, a small folder in her hand. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "It's not fake," she said, raising the document high for everyone to see. "The United States Department of Justice has issued a federal search warrant. Alexander Ward, you are under investigation for securities fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The crowd gasped again, this time louder. Photographers surged forward. Phones rose in trembling hands. Some people backed away, as if standing too close might make them complicit. 2 men in dark suits appeared at the ballroom entrance, badges glinting under the chandelier light. Their steps were firm, deliberate, and unhurried. The lead agent spoke clearly, his voice echoing, "Federal agents, nobody leaves the room." Graham turned and ran. He made it 3 steps before another agent intercepted him near the bar. His polished shoes slipped on the marble floor, sending him sprawling. Cuffs clicked shut around his wrists before he could even form a sentence. The guests whispered in disbelief, the scene unfolding like a movie they couldn't look away from. The pianist had frozen mid-note. The chandeliers seemed to sway in the heavy stillness. Alexander stood motionless at the center of it all. The power, the arrogance, the control that had defined him evaporated under the harsh white light of the LED screen. He looked at Elena, really looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. The woman he had dismissed as ordinary now stood tall, every inch of her radiating quiet authority. His lips parted, but no sound came. Elena didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply turned her gaze toward the agents and gave a single nod. The men in dark suits stepped forward, their movements calm, methodical, and final. One of them read Alexander his rights, each word striking the air like a hammer against glass. The other reached for his arm, his grip firm but impersonal. Then came the sound, the sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place. It echoed through the grand room, louder than any applause that had ever filled it, louder than the hollow promises that had built this empire. It was the sound of an ending. For a single moment, Alexander's eyes found Elena's across the room. There was no fury in them, no denial, only a hollow disbelief, the look of a man watching the illusion of his power dissolve into dust. The empire he had crafted from lies, manipulation, and arrogance was collapsing, brick by brick, and standing at the center of its ruin was the woman he had once dismissed as insignificant. The woman he thought he could control was now the one who had brought him to his knees, outside. The wail of sirens began to rise, a haunting chorus that grew closer with every passing second. The sound bled through the marble walls, merging with the low murmur of voices that dared not speak too loudly. No one moved. No one dared to break the stillness that followed the fall of a king. Alexander Ward, the man who had believed himself untouchable, who had built a kingdom on deception and greed, now stood surrounded, stripped of every illusion, every mask, every ounce of control. All that remained was the truth, and it hung in the air heavier than any verdict a court could deliver. And across from him, Elena Brooks stood steady, her expression unreadable. She didn't gloat, didn't smile. Justice. She knew, didn't need celebration. It only needed to be seen. He had once called her replaceable. Now, she was the last one left standing. Outside the ballroom, the night air was heavy with the scent of salt and sea breeze. Police lights flashed across the marble driveway, painting everything in shades of red and blue. The once grand mansion now looked like a crime scene, its elegance replaced by chaos. Guests whispered in disbelief as officers escorted Alexander Ward into a waiting car, his hands cuffed, his eyes hollow. Elena stepped through the front doors, calm amid the storm. The moment her heels touched the gravel, a voice called out from the crowd, "Special Agent Brooks." The words sliced through the noise. Heads turned. The guests who had mocked her hours earlier now stared in stunned silence. A man in a gray suit approached, his posture straight, his expression steady. He offered her a firm nod of respect. 4 years undercover, he said quietly. You did it. You took him down. Elena returned the nod, her face unreadable. It wasn't just him. It was everything he built. The man gave a faint smile. You always did prefer the long game. Then he turned to coordinate with the agents securing the property, leaving her standing under the mansion's glowing archway. The wind carried faint music from the ballroom, now empty but still echoing with ghosts of laughter. Elena looked back once. The chandelier still shimmered, pretending nothing had changed. But she knew better. Everything had. A young waitress, still in her uniform, hesitated nearby. Her hands trembled as she held a tray of untouched glasses. "Ma'am," she asked softly, "were you really FBI?" Elena looked at her, eyes softening. She reached out and took one glass from the tray, placing it gently back down. "Sometimes justice wears a white blouse," she said with a faint smile, "not a suit." The girl's eyes widened. For a moment, she forgot about the broken dishes, the screaming guests, the scandal that would fill headlines by morning. All she saw was a woman who had stood alone against power and won. Elena adjusted her jacket, the faint outline of her badge visible under the fabric, now that she no longer needed to hide it. Around her, agents moved with quiet precision, collecting evidence, marking files, securing witnesses. The machine of justice had come alive. And she was at silent heart. Her partner approached again, holding a sealed folder. "The department wants you in Washington by morning. The evidence from Zurich just came in. It connects everything." Elena took the folder, her fingers brushing the seal. "Good. Then we're not done yet." The agent smiled slightly. "You ever sleep, Brooks?" She looked up at the night sky, stars scattered over the ocean's horizon. "When the right people fall asleep," she replied. Behind her, the mansion that had once stood as a monument to untouchable power now loomed in silence, its chandeliers dimmed, its marble halls hollow, stripped of illusion. What had sparkled hours ago under champagne laughter and whispered deals now felt cold, lifeless. The empire Alexander Ward had built on lies had finally collapsed under the weight of truth. The guests, once dazzled by his charm, would return home with stories to tell, stories of downfall, betrayal, and the shocking end of a man who believed himself untouchable. The headlines would come by morning. His name would fill every screen. His downfall dissected by experts who had once praised him. But none of them would know what it had truly taken to bring him down. The sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the years of pretending. Only Elena Brooks knew. She had lived inside his world, hidden behind a smile, her beige buried under layers of deceit, for 4 long years. She had walked among liars, worn their clothes, spoken their language, and played their games. She had become one of them to destroy one of them. Now it was over. Elena stood for a moment, her gaze fixed on the house as if to make sure it was real, that it was truly finished. The cold night air bit against her skin, sharp and grounding. Then she turned and began walking toward the line of black government cars idling by the gate. Reporters crowded behind the barricades, shouting her name, their questions slicing through the air. "Agent Brooks? Did you know him personally? Was he dangerous? Do you regret it?" She didn't answer. The cameras flashed like lightning, but she never turned around. She didn't need to. The story wasn't hers to tell, not tonight. For Alexander Ward, this night marked the end of everything: power, legacy, illusion. For Special Agent Elena Brooks, it marked something else entirely. It wasn't triumph, and it wasn't relief. It was the quiet beginning of whatever came next. As she reached the car and the door closed behind her, the mansion faded from view. And for the first time in 4 years, Elena allowed herself to breathe. By morning, the world had already chosen its headline: "The FBI Bride Who Took Down a Billionaire." The story spread like wildfire across every network, every screen, every whisper of morning talk shows. The images were everywhere. Alexander Ward in handcuffs, his face pale against the flashing lights. Elena Brooks stepping into a black car, her expression unreadable. Reporters called it the fall of an empire. Investors called it a bloodbath. What Alexander had built over 15 years crumbled in less than 15 hours. Ward Global Holdings collapsed before the stock market even opened. Trading halted within minutes, panic spreading through the financial world like a contagion. Dozens of shell companies connected to Ward were exposed. Offshore accounts in Zurich, Monaco, and Singapore froze overnight. The illusion of control shattered completely. Madeline Ward, once the queen of the charity circuit, found herself surrounded by investigators. Her old text messages leaked to the press, revealing conversations about helping Alexander move a few things under the radar. Her photos vanished from the company website, her name scrubbed from every press release. The glamorous cousin who once laughed at Elena's plain white dress was now photographed hiding behind dark sunglasses, refusing to speak. The cameras shifted next to the helicopter pad. Alexander stood surrounded by federal agents, her wrists locked in steel. The same hands that once signed billion-dollar deals now trembled slightly in the wind. As the rotor spun, whipping his hair and suit, he lifted his head to look at Elena standing a few feet away. The night before, she had been his fiancée. Now, she was the woman who destroyed everything he was. His voice cracked as he shouted over the roar of the blades. "Did you ever love me, Elena?" The words hung in the air, fragile and desperate. She didn't answer. She stepped forward instead, handing a sealed envelope to the lead agent. "For him," she said simply. Alexander took it with shaking fingers. The envelope was thin, light, familiar. He tore it open, expecting another legal document. Instead, it was a small folded sheet of paper, handwritten in ink. "I did once, but you chose power over truth." His breath caught. The helicopter lifted, wind tearing at his sleeves, his tie whipping across his face. He looked down at the paper again, but the words blurred behind his tears. For the first time in his life, Alexander Ward understood what it meant to lose something that couldn't be bought back. The city below shimmered like a sea of glass, endless and indifferent. Each light represented a life, a story he had once touched, twisted or broken. Somewhere down there were the people he had lied to, the ones he had manipulated for profit and power, the ones who had once trusted him. He used to believe he could control everything and everyone, that the world would always bend to his will. But now, as the helicopter lifted higher into the darkening sky, all that remained was silence. He turned his gaze to the window, and his reflection stared back at him, a man he barely recognized. The confident glint that had once defined him was gone. In its place was someone older, smaller, and hollowed out by consequence. The city lights blurred against the glass, refracting across his tired face like shards of the empire he had built and lost. For the first time, he saw himself not as a visionary, not as a leader, but as what he truly was, a man stripped of illusion. Down below. Elena stood among the chaos. The whirring blades faded into the distance, taking with them the sound of years spent chasing justice. Around her, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, questions hurled like stones. Cameras flashed, headlines were already forming, and the story she had fought so hard to uncover, was spreading across the world in real time. But Elena barely heard them. There was no triumph in her expression, no hint of satisfaction. Victory, she realized, rarely feels victorious. It comes quietly, carrying with it the weight of what had to be lost to reach it. Her breath came slow and steady as she looked up at the empty sky, the faint echo of the helicopter fading beyond the horizon. The noise of the press, the distant sirens, the city itself, all seemed muted compared to the silence that settled inside her. For years, she had dreamed of this moment, the day truth would finally win, the day his lies would collapse under their own weight. But standing there, she understood that justice was never clean. It demanded a price. It took pieces of everyone it touched. And now, even in victory, she felt that cost heavy on her shoulders. The lights of the city flickered against her eyes, reflected like distant stars. Somewhere out there, lives would change because of what she had done. Some would call her a hero, others, a destroyer. But to Elena, labels no longer mattered. What mattered was that the truth, fragile, painful, necessary, had finally been set free. And as the night swallowed the last trace of the helicopter's sound, she let out a slow breath, not of triumph, not of regret, but of quiet closure, the kind that comes when justice, at long last, has spoken. The city shrank behind her as the train cut through the mist of dawn. Glass towers faded into gray, replaced by rolling hills and the quiet hum of a new morning. Elena sat by the window, a worn leather notebook resting on her lap. The cover bore 3 faded words written in her own hand. Operation Dawnlight. Inside, every page carried years of sacrifice, codes, dates, hidden names, and the steps that had finally brought down Alexander Ward's empire. She flipped through the last page and paused at a single line scribbled in blue ink. Justice requires patience. Her mother had said it once when Elena was just a girl learning to balance truth with kindness. Now. As the morning sun bled across the horizon, those words felt like both a scar and a compass. The train slowed as it entered a small coastal town. Elena gathered her things, blending easily into the handful of passengers who disembarked. No reporters, no flashing lights, no questions, just the soft whisper of waves and a salty wind that carried the promise of peace. At the edge of the harbor stood a modest brick building with frosted windows and a brass plate by the door that read, Aurora Foundation. The place smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, sunlight spilling through half-open blinds. Elena set her bag down on the desk, opened the window, and let the sea air fill the room. On one wall hung a single photograph, a simple image of her parents standing in front of their small house, smiling. It reminded her why she had started all this. Minutes later, the door creaked open. A woman in her 40s stepped in, nervous, clutching a folder to her chest. Her hands shook slightly. "I wasn't sure you'd really see me," she said softly. "No one else has listened." Elena smiled, motioning for her to sit. "I'm listening." The woman exhaled a long breath, as if releasing years of fear. She began to speak, hesitant at first, then faster, her story tumbling out like water finally breaking through a dam, a company that promised investments, a husband who trusted too much, savings gone, home gone, faith gone. Elena took notes silently, her pen gliding across the paper. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge. Every story mattered. Every loss deserved to be seen. When the woman finished, tears glistened on her cheeks. "They told me I was stupid," she whispered, "that it was my fault." Elena handed her a small tissue and spoke gently. "You believed in honesty. That's not a weakness. It's what they fear most." Outside, gulls circled above the bay, their cries sharp and distant. The woman wiped her eyes, managing a small smile. "So what happens now?" Elena closed the notebook. "Now we rebuild, one case at a time." The woman nodded, stood, and shook Elena's hand. There was gratitude in her touch, a quiet strength that mirrored Elena's own. When she left, the room fell silent again, filled only with the sound of the wind brushing against the glass. Elena leaned back in her chair and opened her notebook to a blank page. She wrote down the date, then the woman's name, followed by 3 words. Phase 1, Reclaim Hope. Her phone buzzed once on the desk, a message from the Justice Department. They wanted her to lead a new investigation. Something big, something international.